I used a sound wall for 3 years, and by year 3, it looked completely different than how it started. For me, it just didn't pay off for the amount of time I was spending on it, so I changed it. No, I didn't throw it out completely. I did what teachers do. I changed it. So before we start, I'm going to quickly explain who I am and what I'm doing here. I'm a first grade teacher who has taught different grade levels in different settings. And I love to hear about how other teachers are making things work in their classroom. So this is my way of sharing a real look inside my classroom and hopefully learning from yours too. It's definitely not the polished version of teaching. It's messy, it's realistic, real life, and it's responsive to the needs of the students right in front of me, which requires some off-script interactions. Sometimes I simplify things, and sometimes I forget the fancy terminology, and sometimes I'm just figuring things out in real time with my students. But the routines I use work because I've spent years learning about how children learn to read and then taking those ideas and testing them in an actual classroom. A huge part of my approach is using writing to teach reading. I try to combine skills whenever possible so students are hearing sounds, writing words, reading words, and thinking about language all at the same time. And this approach saves teachers time and energy because ultimately I want reading instruction to be effective, manageable, and sustainable for teachers. When I first read Speech to Print by Louisa Moats, I wanted to find a way to incorporate the ideas into my classroom. I could be wrong, but I don't remember the book specifically mentioning sound walls. But when I heard about sound walls, I thought this was a great way to put the ideas into practice. Starting with sound and then connecting it with print felt like a very natural way to teach reading and writing. So I decided to fully commit and see what would happen in my classroom. My first year incorporating a sound wall was in kindergarten. I followed the approach very closely. I had a full sound wall set up with the big kind of creepy-ish mouth pictures with the vowel valley on one side and the consonants on the other side. And I used all the official terminology like fricatives, stops, voiced, unvoiced. And I said all those words with kindergartners, the same kindergartners that were picking the tape up off the carpet and doodling on their sit spot. And it made sense. There were definitely benefits, but I started to feel like it just wasn't paying off in proportion to the amount of time I was spending on it as its own part of the day. Not because it wasn't good, but because something in my day always had to give, and I had to be really intentional about what stayed and how it stayed. So year 2, I was teaching first grade, and it was my second year using it, so I started thinking more about how everything fit together. And I still like the idea of starting with sound and moving to the print, but I needed the sound wall to take less time in my day and less space on my wall. So I simplified and I moved away from the heavier terminology and I focused more on kid-friendly language. We used the mirrors and we paid attention to how our mouths move, and I kept everything really practical. And at this point, the sound wall routine still had its own place in my reading block. We talked about the sounds that make our language, right before the explicit daily handwriting lesson that I used to review each letter and sound individually. But the routine as a whole didn't really work really well for my students and my schedule, which was keeping kids sitting and focused for a long time. So I eventually shortened it. I shortened the sound wall routine and incorporated it into the handwriting lesson. And this handwriting lesson, as we move through the alphabet, eventually focused on words and spelling instead of letter formation. So that same handwriting time as the year progressed became using the sound of the day to spell words, which means we were immediately practicing spelling words using the sound spelling pattern that was introduced that day. So handwriting to read routine eventually later in the year becomes writing to read because we move the individual letter sounds and formation of the letter in a closed syllable word, and we move on to different syllable patterns and writing words using specific sound spelling patterns. After we reviewed all the letters with the handwriting to read lesson, we were just writing to read words, but still monitoring and correcting their handwriting habits at this time of the day. Eventually, we were less worried on the individual letter and the strokes and moved on to stretch the sounds we hear in this word, dot the phonemes, write the symbol for each sound that we're hearing, write the correct symbol for that sound, and use that handwriting skill that we learned at the beginning of the year to record these words with this specific pattern correctly with nice handwriting. And eventually we're not really focused that much on individual letter strokes, because after the beginning of the year, when we've had a very clear and specific review of each letter and how to write them nicely, we can move on from a one-syllable word and eventually write two-syllable words. And of course, all that can be coordinated with your required curriculum. And this provides a safety net, not only for handwriting, but also for more opportunities for repetition, which is what kids really need to learn to read well. And if you want to know more about that specific routine and how it looks in my classroom now, of course, I'm going to link all that information. It's a very small little piece of the day that does so much to complement the required curriculum in my classroom. So by the third year, I had trimmed the sound wall routine even more, and I stopped using the huge face pictures of the consonant sound. I still use the vowel valley pictures. They're just smaller now, and they take up less space in the classroom. And I keep these vowel pictures because of how important vowels are when learning to read multisyllabic words. So when kids are ready to start reading those bigger words, the vowels will serve as an anchor as to where they're going to decide to divide that word into smaller chunks. But year 3 is where I officially made the sound discussion embedded into the handwriting to read routine by kicking off the lesson with a very, very brief informal discussion about what we notice when we make this sound we are introducing and combining it with other sounds in our language to make words. Then we quickly move on to use that sound, and we represent that sound on paper with symbols. And then as a class, we decide what words we might need with that sound to be first grade authors. So my big takeaway, I still start with sound and move to print when introducing these new sounds and these new spelling patterns, because I do believe in that part. But now I connect it quickly to the writing of the letter and the letter combinations and the writing of the word. So instead of a separate sound lesson, it's built right into my phonics and handwriting time. And this is what I call handwriting to read it or writing to read it, because our handwriting eventually is just like fire and heart emojis. And they can use that beautiful handwriting to spell words that they will need when they write independently. And these words go on the wall in the order that we introduce that syllable type or that spelling pattern or that letter combination. And they are expected to write these words correctly. One of the biggest benefits is that I can clearly document that I am explicitly teaching articulation, which is especially helpful for students who need speech support, and provides direct instruction that can be easily documented. I can take notes at that time on that particular student or refer back to my lesson plan to see when and how it was introduced or reviewed in class. And I can collaborate with the speech therapist and ask them, hey, what is a good way to talk about the articulation or the correct articulation of this sound with this child? And I've absolutely kept the emphasis on the vowels because that has made a real difference in how my students read and spell. The vowel valley is probably one piece that I'll always hold on to. Vowels matter, especially as words get longer and more complex. They serve as the anchor that helps the student figure out how to break that word apart into little chunks, smaller chunks. Because watching a student go sound by sound in a very long multisyllabic word is very painful. So I adjusted some things here. I still use many parts of the sound wall instruction in my classroom, just the most important parts that I found to be the most impactful for my students, because I need every part of my instruction to do more than just one job. Instead of giving sound its own space and time, I built it into what we're already doing. And that made it much more manageable and much more connected for my students and saved me a ton of time and energy. Now, when I review letters and sounds, I include a quick articulation moment. It's informal, it's fast. The kids are often giving me the words for what they're feeling in their mouths and in their voices. It's student-friendly language. We look at it, we try it, we notice what our mouth is doing, and then we move straight into writing it and recording those sounds within words that we need to become great authors. I'm really interested to hear how other teachers are using sound walls right now? Are you keeping the full setup, or have you adjusted it to fit your time? And if you found a way to make it all work without feeling rushed, I would really, really love to hear what that looks like in your classroom. And of course, if you disagree, agree, have suggestions, strong opinions, please make sure to share them. And always check out the little description area for links. Here's where you'll find the custom Write Little Readers GPT, where you'll upload a picture of writing and get some great ways to move forward with your Write Little Reader. This custom GPT is intended specifically for early literacy and student writing analysis. A huge part of my teaching philosophy is using writing to teach reading in all subjects. Actually, we'll get to that later, because writing forces students to slow down and truly process sounds, letters, patterns, words, and ideas in a way that nothing else can. Over the years, I've developed a lot of systems, scaffolds, routines, and shortcuts that help me make reading instruction more effective while also making my job more manageable and sustainable as a classroom teacher. And I'd like to make your job easier too. So this custom GPT is essentially me loaning out my teacher brain after years of teaching kids how to read, spell, write, and connect all those pieces together inside a real classroom with a bunch of kids, usually a bunch of noise. It isn't just generic AI giving broad teaching advice. The goal is for it to analyze student writing and think more like an experienced early literacy teacher, noticing patterns, gaps, giving next steps, and possible instructional moves. You can grab the link below if you want to try it with your own students' writing samples or your kids' writing samples, dictation, spelling work, or phonics practice. And if you would like me to walk you through every week, I'll be linking lesson plans that include my most impactful literacy routines that can be used as a do now or a warm up that can enhance your current curriculum requirements or totally replace them. Just kidding. But they can. These can be a safety net that can give you all the time in the world and all the grace you need to fumble through a new adopted curriculum. But for real, I have survived and my kids have thrived during any shift in curriculum or leadership because of these simple 5-minute routines that I incorporate into my day. And of course, the handwriting to read it routine or writing to read it routine is one of those. Please come back so we can learn more together.